Welcome from my side, and now I will switch to German because we have a German-speaking panel here. Ich freue mich sehr auf dieses Schlusspanel.
I'm very much looking forward to this final panel discussion of today. The last panels dealt with Europe, and now we would like to focus on Germany a little bit. And before I get started with the panelists, it's actually only female panelists. And before we deal with the question, does Germany live up to its role as a refuge for exiled journalists, I would like to give the viewers the opportunity to answer that question. So you can answer that question with yes and no. This is a little survey, and you have to use the Mentimeter for that. You have already used it today, and you can answer the question. I would be quite happy about it, because then I could also include the answer to this question in our discussion. During the next hour, we will talk about the question, does Germany live up to its role as a refuge for exiled journalists? We do that in 3 steps. First, we will talk about the situation of journalists in exile in Germany, what are the difficulties, and maybe what is also helpful for them during their work. In the second step, we will take a look at support programs and subsidies in Germany. Has the landscape changed over the past 10 to 15 years? And then in the third step, we will talk about the question whether Germany lives up to its role. And I'm very happy that we have 3 highly competent experts for this panel, and I would like to introduce them in alphabetical order. First, I'm delighted to have Negin Behkam with us. Ms. Behkam is a volunteer at the Protestant Journalist School in Berlin, and she is a board member of the German Journalists Association Berlin-Brandenburg. She was born in Tehran, and she actually studied computer sciences, and later she worked as an editor for opposition newspapers. Before, in 2010, she went into exile in Germany. Here in Germany, she has been working as a free journalist, and she has also been working for the media platform Berlin, which we were talking about today as well. Welcome, Ms. Behkam. Thank you. I'm also very happy to welcome Lisa Maria Kretschmer. She is an advocacy officer at Reporters Without Borders Germany. She conducted research on transparency and independence of media worldwide. She studied political communication, journalism, and economics, and she has been working for the German Society for International Cooperation. She worked for the German Parliament and the Ludwig Max University in Munich. Welcome. And last but not least, I'm happy to welcome Irene Planck. Since July 2020, she is the Director for Strategic Communication at the German Federal Foreign Office. Before that, she was Director of the Economics and Human Rights section at the Federal Foreign Office. She has been working in diplomatic services in Arabic countries for many years, and she also worked in the United States. She is a legal expert, and she also worked as a lawyer. Ms. Planck, welcome to you. Hello. I would like to get started by asking you whether you can present what it means to flee to Germany, to be in exile in Germany, and what it feels like to start a new life in Germany and get access to this new life. So, Ms. Behkam, what was the situation like when you had to leave your country and when you came to Germany? End of 2010, I had to leave my home country, Iran, Back then, Ahmadinejad was the president. For the second time, he was re-elected. And during this time, many journalists were imprisoned and many left the country because the situation was quite risky for journalists. Back then, journalists faced many difficulties working there. I worked at a daily newspaper in Tehran, and many colleagues of mine were imprisoned. I think more than 5 or 6 people had to go to prison back then, and each and every day it was the case. I went to the editor's office and we heard the news. Someone was imprisoned again or someone else left the country secretly. And then we received a secret letter by the Ministry of Culture, and our department was actually part of the Ministry of Culture, or the ministry was responsible for us. Also, my department, I was working in the Department of Economics, and actually everyone had to be fired. Then I was able to find a new job within 1 or 2 weeks. The magazine was called Bahar. However, this newspaper, Bahar, was also shut down by the government. And that is why I had to leave my home country, Iran. So you left Iran and you came to Germany. What was helpful and what were the difficulties? Well, there have been many difficulties. There are still difficulties. And of course, you can imagine what I'm talking about. A big challenge was and still is the language. If you want to work as a journalist, you will have to be able to master the language, and this has not been solved yet. And it is also the way of working. When you come here as an adult, as a journalist in exile, you have already made your experiences in your home country, and then suddenly you have to start again. You're not prepared, you don't know the language, you don't know how to access the job market, you don't know how, when, where. And as a journalist in exile, maybe you're not 18 years old, you already have professional experience. And that makes the situation a little bit difficult, because many offers that are available for people who had to flee their country are actually offers for young people, for very young people. Yeah, that's it. But I think you found your way to Reporters Without Borders. Ms. Kretschmer, I would also like to involve you in that regard. So there are different offers, for instance, by Reporters Without Borders. And there are also some things which are necessary. Things have to be enabled. What do you think about the development of the offers? What was the situation like 10 or 15 years ago, and what is the current situation? Because we want to talk about the current situation in Germany with regard to support programs. Yes, there are support programs, and without the support by Reporters Without Borders, I would not be here right now. That is the most important support which I received. However, I would also say that the support which was given to me, for which I'm quite thankful, mainly comes from international organizations such as Reporters Without Borders or individuals who you get to know over time. I don't know, maybe you get the opportunity to meet those individuals. So from a structural point of view, there are not too many offers for journalists in exile. But there are also smaller projects which are quite important and helpful. You mentioned the Amal project, which is a multilingual news platform in Berlin and Hamburg. And those projects are quite helpful, but there are others as well. But of course, this is not enough comparing it to the number of journalists in exile living in Germany. Ms. Kretschmer, we heard from Ms. Behkam that there are difficulties, and at the beginning I also mentioned that you are she's a voluntary worker at the Protestant Journalists School, and she was able to work at Amal. But what do you think? How did the situation change? From our point of view, the diversity of the offers has grown. The journalists in exile have different stories, they have different requirements. Some of them need language courses, sometimes they need help with application procedures, and we try to consider each and every single case. However, we also see that there are two different segments. There are programs supporting the journalists, there are bilingual programs, they try to integrate the journalists, and we focus on media, which is actually broadcasting news to the home countries. There are great programs for that. Amal is one example for that. And we try to really focus on the home countries as well. And what we can observe is that the integrative programs have grown over time since 2015, and that is why we at Reporters Without Borders want to support those media which are focusing on media pluralism, media diversity. What we can still say that Germany is one of the main destinations. Journalists from all over the world come to Germany, and the offer is well appreciated and well received. Of course, later we will also be talking about what more can be done and how we can also send journalists back and help them to get back. And I think we lack financial support, especially financial support. We will get back to that, but you described the development. It is first about the integration measures into the labor market, and now there is a shift towards supporting journalists who would also like to broadcast news in their home countries or publish news. Ms. Plank? Yes, but one correction. I don't think that there is a shift. It's just two areas, two segments. And in 2015, there have been more. Since 2015, there have been more integrative programs, but we at Reporters Without Borders, we focus more on the other segment. But indeed, it also describes a trend. Ms. Plank, the foreign minister, Maas, announced a new initiative supporting the journalists in Germany. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this new initiative. Why does it come now? And what type of support are we talking about from the German Federal Foreign Office?
Thank you, Mr. Tetzlaff. And also thanks to Ms. Behkam and Ms. Kretschmer. Ms. Kretschmer, you mentioned the buzzword, you mentioned support and how the perspectives have changed. The support to journalists to send them back to their home country is something that the German Federal Foreign Office does. And we have a new initiative that Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs initiated not so long ago and also published it on Twitter. I believe it was established in June 2020, and that's the Elisabeth Zabat initiative that is implemented together with the Institute of Foreign Relations. It is placed on a broader foundation. It's not just about journalism. It is an initiative that wants to help advocates of human rights, including journalists, of course. Everyone making the case for human rights needs to be supported, either within the framework of the initiative or whenever they need a temporary refuge and then there is a lack of financing or they don't have the means to lead a life in safety. And then, of course, they are often not in their home region. This is like a fellowship where the people affected get grants. And this initiative was established in June, and we have not yet had the chance to gather information. So I would like to give you a context. We have similar programs that have run for several months.
Können Sie mich noch hören? Wir haben gerade ein ganz
There is a technical issue.
Muss ich mich mal ganz kurz melden. Sie können aber gerne weitersprechen.
Give us a couple of seconds, but you can continue.
Auf zwei andere Programme.
I would like to talk about two other projects, the Martin Roth Initiative for Artists and the Philipp Schwarz Initiative for Threatened Scientists, and the Elisabeth Zellberg Initiative with its own purpose, helping journalists. It aims at helping journalists to continue their work even though they are not on the ground. They have to work remotely and they are given administrative and financial support. It is like a fellowship. Thank you so much for the explanations. Ms. Behkam, I would like to know how you feel. You are a journalist in exile, wanting to inform people in Iran, or is it more the Iranian community here in Germany or in Europe? Do you want to inform the German population about Iran? What's your perspective? Well, I can only talk about my personal situation. And I decided that I needed to get to know my audience. And I was curious and I was really motivated. I wanted to take part in this society. I wanted to be a part of this society. Of course, I have a different background. And whenever I work with Exile Media, then I talk about people in Iran, but also Iranians abroad. And I really tried to gain a foothold in Germany, also journalistically speaking. It is quite surreal, it's absurd that you are in a small room in Berlin and you sit at your desk alone, and as an exiled journalist, you write about your country, and you've been doing so for years, and you cannot go there anymore. It's absurd. And I wanted to continue my work. And that is why I expanded my portfolio, so to speak. I'm not only focused on Iran anymore. I widened my field, and I really tried to gain a foothold in the German media and to be able to participate. Thank you. I truly believe that it is important to be aware of your target group, where you report to, and exiled journalists, and we've been talking about this several times now. Their focus can be quite different. During the last few years, we have seen that this heterogeneous field has become much more active. Now we know of the new initiative that Ms. Planck presented, aiming at human rights advocates. So we have this broad field of journalism, but in this broad field we have different approaches and different opinions. We have human rights activists, we have journalists, and of course different political attitudes. And what does that mean? If you want to support journalists in exile, does it make a difference if exile journalism is filled with life with a different spirit? Or maybe there is no difference. What do you mean when you say attitude? Because the major or decisive factor for us is that someone can no longer do their work in their home country, because this is tantamount to an abuse of human rights. So maybe you're pointing at foreign policy problems, I don't know. Of course, there is a field of tension.
Es kann da natürlich ein Spannungsfeld geben, denn als Auswärtiges Amt
and also as the Foreign Office, we see this field of tension, but we are in constant contact to these countries, the countries where the people came from. And sometimes it is difficult.
Menschenrechtlich Bedrohten hier eine Zuflucht und eine Unterstützung gewähren. Aber das ist ja nicht nur im Falle von
And of course, they don't like that we offer these people who are persecuted a place of refuge.
Das heißt, damit können wir umgehen, diese Spannung können wir aushalten.
But this is the field of tension I was referring to, but this is something we can work with.
Internationalen Fora.
We have different international fora where we discuss things like these. We discuss this with governments and we tell them if we think something should be done differently. This isn't something you will read about on the front page of your daily newspaper. It is sometimes much more effective if you do this within a different context. But we don't have a problem in offering people the chance to continue their work here, and we will continue to do so with a focus vis-à-vis their home countries.
Durchaus auch einen Grund, warum das hier in
But of course,
Institut für Auslandsbeziehungen,
the Institute of Foreign Relations
sehr einmischen und wozu wir dann eben jetzt auch
is leading this initiative, and There's good reason why this institute does that, and we stand behind it. We are co-financers of this initiative. But it's also a question of IFA and how these fellows are selected and how they are supported. But this is a decision taken by IFA.
Eine sozusagen zurückgezogene Haltung der direkten Unterstützung.
When it comes to direct support, we are rather more cautious. A few days ago, there was a resolution taken at the German Bundestag where CDU, SPD and the Green Party supported the initiative against Lukashenko. And this is also the attitude that we see abroad. Is that also a reflection of the attitude of the German Federal Foreign Office? Where and how do you support actions like these directly? Well, the Foreign Office is a ministry and therefore part of the German government. And whenever the government decides to do something, we support them. Ms. Kretschmer, supporting journalists, be it directly or indirectly, is of course a topic that is dear to Reporters Without Borders, and you observe it closely, I believe. What kind of support is important and necessary? What do you think?
Da gleich anschließend, ich glaube, das Spannungsfeld zwischen Außenpolitik und
Ms. Blank mentioned a field of tension, which we also see, and sometimes we see it even more drastic. We see that Exile Media needs support so they are able to broadcast. The Elisabeth Zabat was mentioned, and it is very well positioned within this broader context, and also its implementation is very well done. But nevertheless, I can think of different examples where Exile Media should have supported differently, but it wasn't because there was a conflict with foreign interests or foreign relations related interests. Also with Maidan TV, I cannot tell you exactly when it was. I believe it was in 2015, 2016. And there was a statement saying that it was in conflict with foreign politics. Maybe there is fear to support actions like these when media outlets broadcast this. Thanks for your thoughts. Before we continue, I would like to ask Ms. Beckham something that we also discussed this afternoon. We talked about exile journalists and the fact that their work has changed drastically during the last 10 or 15 years because of digitalization, platforms, social media channels, and the internet as such. The Iranian position of the 80s and 90s had completely different tools for broadcasting and covering stories compared to the tools that we have now. So you can widen the circle of informants and sources, but this of course bears the risk of having authoritarian regimes persecuting these people. Now, I would like to know, Ms. Beckham, is this a topic that you were faced with, unfortunately? What do you mean? You mean during these 10 years when I was in Germany, or what are you referring to? As a journalist, the means of communication are playing a bigger role. You don't have to be personally affected, but maybe you can talk about other journalists in exile from Iran who were faced with the situation. The new communication tools. And we now talk of repression without borders owing to these new tools. Of course, it's about access to the home country. It's about access to different people, and this access has become simpler in many ways. And then we had protests last year in Iran, and for the very first time, the internet was shut down in the entire country, and no one could do anything about it. But these are, of course, exceptions, but still, it helped tremendously when affected people were affected, or people who were persecuted can be reached. The way I see it, or the way I have observed it during the last year or so, exile Iranian media outlets can now directly reach out to people in Iran, talk to the families of people who are put in jail or even killed by the government. And this is, of course, a major change that we've been able to observe. But at the same time, we have different aspects. You mentioned it yourself. It is much easier for the government to, well, how can I put it, discover people who have become active. It is a big problem for many journalists who operate outside of Iran. Their families are still in the country. They are being put under pressure. They're often being summoned to the ministries to answer questions. Some are even incarcerated. And that's a huge problem. Talking of observation on the internet or surveillance, what does that mean for Reporters Without Borders if these platforms can be used for persecution? And in Germany, but also other countries, we discuss about new ways of encryption. How do you see things? Are we on the right track?
Well, the exiled journalists are using digital tools most of the time because they also want to broadcast internationally, they want to broadcast into different countries, they get in touch with journalists from other countries or with people who are not on site. And those are, of course, actually touch points or weaknesses in terms of surveillance. So those journalists can actually be attacked digitally. And this is something that we also observe in terms of journalists in exile, in addition to all the threats and risks that also exist. So we also work with the State Office of Criminal Investigations in order to deal with that problem. We also ask whether the risk comes from the population, from other journalists, from governments, and we also think that it is also important to have digital security, especially during times of Corona, because everything takes place digitally. And we very specifically support exiled journalists and exile media. There is a program which we came up with where we train journalists to observe those digital risks and to conduct countermeasures. This is such an important aspect during these times. We have to close those access points, those touch points. And most of the journalists can actually do it themselves. And if there are problems, we also have a digital help desk. So the journalists can turn to this help desk in order to ask questions and in order to clarify whether devices are affected, whether they have been attacked. That's already an important tool that we use. Thank you so much. Right now, I'm actually curious about the answer from our audience, whether Germany lives up to its role as a refuge for exiled journalists. So I would like to pass the floor to Johanna Eisenhardt in order to inform us what the result of the survey is.
Die Abstimmung
Thank you,
hat
Sven.
ein nicht ganz eindeutiges
poll
Ergebnis
didn't result in a very clear picture. 40% of the viewers say, yes, Germany lives up to its role as a refuge. 60%, however, say that this is not the case.
Vielen Dank. Das würde ich gerne noch mal
Thank you so much. I would like to give that back to the panelists. So 60% of the viewers say, no, we have to do more. Ms. Plank, are you surprised by that result or was that your expectation?
Also, ich muss ehrlich sagen, ich hatte da
Honestly,
keine bestimmte
I actually
Erwartung, bin aber auch
didn't have
nicht,
any specific
überrascht.
expectations, but I'm not
Und es wäre natürlich
surprised.
spannend, wenn man da noch mal
It would be
nachfragt,
quite exciting
in welchen
to
Bereichen mehr
dive a little
getan werden
deeper
sollte.
and ask the people, what do we need to do more, in which areas? So we have the Elizabeth Zabat initiative. Would it be a support program such as that? Or in Germany, would it be about establishing yourself as a journalist? This is what Ms. Kretschmer said. Or the protection against further persecution by authorities in the home country.
Und ich will mir da jetzt keinen schlanken Fuß machen und sagen, das betrifft wahrscheinlich alles die Innenbehörden.
I don't want to make it easy for myself and say that this only affects the Ministry of Internal Affairs and all the other internal authorities. So it would be quite interesting to ask the question where we have to do more. All right, we will do that later, but you already hinted towards Ms. Kretschmer. So, Ms. Kretschmer, you might already have answers. What else do we have to do? But from our point of view, the survey already reflects what we think. So there are already many offers in place, but especially in terms of the financial support, we could do more, or people could do more. So the subsidy regulation from the Federal Foreign Office and the Federal Ministry for Cooperation and Development are quite complicated. They focus on exile media from other countries, and we would like to see more flexibility. We would like to see the possibility also to focus on other countries, such as the Netherlands, Sweden, Great Britain. They are also exile media in Germany, so the subsidy reality could be adjusted a little bit. Ms. Behkam, Ms. Plank also asked the question what the people who are directly affected would like to see, what they wish for. Would you like to comment on that? Yes, thank you. So, I have been living in Germany for 10 years now, and it's good to ask that question to us, the people who are affected. And I think the question also specifically refers to exiled journalists here in Germany. We do have a potential to work here and to do something here in Germany. So the right support with projects which are sustainable, which are long-term projects, that would be the right thing. I also think that the support program should not only focus on the home countries and what the home countries could do for the home countries, but it should also be about integration work, because the journalists are here in Germany, in this society, and we also have a prospect here. And people also want to hear about our perspectives. This was also a criticism towards German media. People say that the German media is too narrow-minded and should open up to new perspectives. So we are people with a migration background, we are minorities, and we could also offer our perspective. The media should not be too narrow-minded. So it should not only be about our home countries, our countries of origin, but it should also be about Germany. It should be about integrating migrants. I think this would be quite important as well.
Wir waren eben bei den Publikumsabstimmungen.
Well, we had this poll, this survey, and now I would like to ask Johanna whether there are also questions to the panelists. Yes, Sven, thank you. There are questions to the panelists, and I would like to get started with the first question to Negin Behkam. The question is, you are a board member of the German Journalists Association in Berlin. What have you achieved? What were your objectives during your candidature? And does this association represent all the journalists? Well, I was elected to the board, to the old board. Well, actually, it's a long story. We had two associations, one in Brandenburg, one in Berlin. Then we had a merger of these associations. And then I was elected to the new board, and I was part of the new board. So this is when I was elected for the first time, but this was only a short period of time. It only lasted for 1 or 2 months. The old board members had a big fight, and then some people resigned. There was a quarrel. And then new board members were elected, and I'm also elected to the new board. And we want to represent the interests of journalists with a migration background. We would like to adjust the offers of our association. 25% of our members have a migration background, and we would also like to reflect that in our association. We would like to adjust the programs a little bit. So the workshops which are organized should also be adjusted. There should be mentoring programs among German colleagues and non-German colleagues. And there should also be tandems with people who came here to Germany as new members, and we should really get in touch. Thank you. Johanna, are there any other questions? Yes, we do. There is a question to Lisa Kretschmer.
Nein, Entschuldigung, das war die falsche Frage. Mit wie vielen Journalistinnen und Journalisten im Exil arbeitet Reporter ohne Grenzen?
How many journalists in exile does Reporters Without Borders work with? How has the situation changed during the COVID-19 crisis, and what have you done in order to support the journalists? Well, with how many exiled journalists do we work with? That's difficult to say, because there are so many different cases which we have been supporting for many years, and we are always in touch with the people. We are the contact point, so I cannot really give you a figure, but we have round about 700 exiled journalists who have been supported internationally. since our foundation, and the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, well, of course, it's a negative impact. It's not good. Actually, people have the feeling that their dream cannot be fulfilled, that journalism can be sustainable, that they can make a living. Their hopes are dashed. And people have to look for another job in order to come up with a different interim solution. We, of course, try to mobilize all the funds that we have and to also support people in different issues, but there are always different cases. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. We try to follow up on each and every case. Sometimes people also want to leave Germany again, go back to the country of origin and work there, but it's not easy with COVID-19. But since March, we have received fewer requests for emergency help, and the travel restrictions actually make it quite difficult for exiled journalists to come to Germany. So in the regions of crisis and in the war zones, people cannot really leave. Well, and at the end, I would like to ask Ms. Planck a very practical question. What's the duration of the program? Well, it just started and we don't have an end date. It's a foundation, and of course we would like to see that it would discontinue at some point in time, because there is no longer the necessity to run the program, but we don't see it yet. We've just started, and of course it's very exciting. We are in dialogue with you, Ms. Kretschmer, for instance, and with other people who are involved in the program, who participate and will participate in the program, and of course we have to see whether we can fulfill the requirements, whether we can satisfy the people's needs, and whether we can improve things. And we want to make it a sensible component in this package of different support programs, but we don't have an end date for that. We will observe that, and hopefully it will not be needed in the future any longer. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Kretschmer, Ms. Planck, Mrs. Behkam. Thank you so much for your work. All the best for your work and for your future, and we will definitely come back and talk about this topic in the future again.
Danke.